it's Tori, and it's finally time for my May wrap-up. So, first of all, sorry if you hear noises upstairs. I don't really have a super soundproof room, and my family are very busy right now. Often they're not in the house, or at least half of them aren't here. So, it's a little quieter when I film, but not right now. And I just really need to film this, and I'm actually motivated to do it right now. So, we're just gonna do it. Since I have 9 books to talk about, I'm going to not keep rambling at this beginning part, so we'll just get right into the video. This month I ended up listening to 3 audiobooks, the first 2 of which were part of the same series, which is why I'm kind of going to talk about them in the same thing. But first I was able to read Illuminae by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff, and this was for the challenge for arithmancy, which was to read a book written by multiple authors. And I also listened to Gemina, the second book in the Illuminae Files trilogy, and I really loved the audiobooks for these. It's actually a reread for me. I read these before and really enjoyed them that time, but it's even more fun listening to the audiobook. I'm gonna put this one down because I don't want to hold both. But anyway, it was a full cast, so it felt like being in a Star Trek movie. Like, there were sound effects at some parts, the voice actors were really good. It was stellar. Absolutely loved it. And then Gemina, also by the way, was for the divination challenge, which was to read a book set in the future. So I actually wasn't originally planning on picking this up, but when I loved the first audiobook so much, I decided to pick it up. As far as what I enjoyed, I really enjoyed the mystery aspect of this first one of Illuminae. I love Aiden, the psychopathic AI that comes into play. He's very morally gray, and it's in that way where when he does bad things, you can't really blame him because he's so smart that he has a very good reason for doing those bad things, but also, like, they're awful things. So it's a very creepy thing to read in a lot of ways, but I absolutely love Aiden. I love Katie and Ezra. There were some aspects to them that I didn't love. I just felt like Amie Kaufman and Kristoff just made these teenagers really teenagery in both books, and I'll actually talk a little bit more about the characters in this one as well in a second. But so it was a little annoying, but I did enjoy Katie and Ezra a lot. Some of the characters are not my favorite, and especially, I'll just talk about this now while I'm talking about characters. In Gemina, we follow primarily Nick and Hannah, and I did not like them at all. And even Ella, I liked her when I read the book, but I think the voice actor just made her so annoying. Like, she became very annoying, and she's like 15, but she's like a 15-year-old that's trying to act older but doesn't actually know how to, and I don't feel like she's supposed to be that way. She just got a little irritating, which was sad. I still loved her, and like I said, when I read the book, I liked her better, but listening to the voice actor just wasn't good, unfortunately. One other thing that I didn't like so much, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't actually say what this is about. So basically this series follows a court case, essentially. It's a bunch of files that have been collected on these attacks made by this, I want to say like a bioengineering company, Baytech, who attacks this illegal colony and then goes on to try to wipe out all witnesses of the event before they can escape. And so there's just a lot of things going on, and so basically these are like files being presented in court to prove that one of the leaders of this company was heavily involved and that those who were involved need to be punished. I will warn you, if you're sensitive about like swearing and sexual comments, there's a lot of that in here. The swearing, if you read the books, they're blocked out in black. Maybe I can show you. And so like that, blacked out in black boxes, but context clues, like, you know what they're saying a lot of the time, and so it's practically like you're reading it anyway. And then, yeah, there's a lot of sexual comments made via like interviews and online chat and stuff. It was really irritating, actually, because I felt like every single character had a bad mouth, was constantly swearing, at least swearing, if not also making sexual comments. And I just thought it was silly because I was like, okay, not everybody's going to talk like that. And yet everybody in this, it made it hard to really feel like there was much of a difference between the characters. It wasn't a characterization tool, it was just like, yeah, people just talk like this. And I was like, I know lots of people who don't talk like that. So anyway, and that's just my personal preference. And if you are uncomfortable with that, be aware going into this that that is part of it. But I still really enjoyed it. I think I gave Illuminae, I want to say 5 out of 5 stars, and then I think I gave Gemina 4 out of 5 stars. So I didn't like it as much. Like I said, mostly it was the characters that bothered me, plus the action. It was very action-driven rather than mystery-driven like Illuminae, and I preferred the mystery-driven sort of thing. This one just wasn't quite as interesting, unfortunately. However, I have been listening to Obsidio, and I've liked that as well, a little bit more than Gemina as well. So the other audiobook that I listened to was Richard III by William Shakespeare, and I really enjoyed this play. This was for the challenge of History of Magic to read a book that was written more than 10 years ago, and this was written a couple hundred years ago, so definitely covered that challenge. But like I said, I really enjoyed this. It was very interesting, especially after doing a project wherein I was studying a lot about that time period and about those in power at that time period of the Wars of the Roses and then the rise of the Tudors and everything. And so it was very interesting just knowing about that and seeing how Shakespeare, who's living under Elizabeth Tudor, really makes Richard III look like the most manipulative, most cunning, most evil man there could be, that every interaction he ever has is meant to gain power without anybody realizing it until it's too late. And it's just so interesting because the Tudors were the ones who defeated Richard III. And so they wanted to, like, completely destroy any idea anybody could possibly have that he deserved to be king. So just seeing him, like, characterized that way during that time period is very basically what you would expect, and I thought it was very interesting to see that directly from someone living in that time period who believed that about Richard III. Especially knowing historians today are more like, you know, he wasn't a horrible king, and, like, he's a person. Like, nobody's that evil. Like, there's people that will do a lot of terrible things, but their whole life is not completely consisted of evil things. And they just made Richard III look like he was just completely, like, the devil himself. Anyway, so it was very interesting. Also, the fact that they made Margaret of Anjou almost seem like a saint, like she was perfect and she was just this poor, pitiable woman that had her kingdom taken from her. It's just so interesting because even historians today say she wasn't all that great. Tudors obviously supported her because she was a relative by marriage, but the Lancasters, Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou, the Tudors were able to come to the throne because they were closely related to that family, and so they, like, praised them, and they were the good guys kind of a thing. And so it was just very interesting to see that. I do enjoy Shakespeare's plays. I find more and more. I just need to read more of them. So the first book I physically read this month was Rook by Shannon Cameron. This is for the challenge of Ancient Runes, which is to read a retelling. This is sort of a retelling of the Scarlet Pimpernel. It's also more of a homage because it's not a complete, like, following the story of the Scarlet Pimpernel, but there's a lot of connection to it. Basically, if you don't know what the Scarlet Pimpernel is, Scarlet Pimpernel follows the French Revolution, and there's this man who is saving all of these aristocrats from the guillotine. He's saving them from prison and then just leaving behind a symbol of a Scarlet Pimpernel, which is a flower. Then there's this woman who's marrying this man, and he kind of has this wall up for everybody. He pretends to be an idiot, but she's been able to break through that wall a little bit. However, when they get married, he ends up putting a wall up with her as well, and she's not completely sure why. So, very good. So this one actually follows the future, but it's a regress society, so there was, like, this solar flare that destroyed all technology, and so humanity basically regressed into a medieval type period of time. They kind of are having a repeat of the French Revolution, and the main girl is the Rook, who basically is saving these people from the knife, I think is what they call it in this, instead of the guillotine. And she's about to get married, but she thinks there's more to this guy she's marrying than meets the eye, just as there's more to her than meets the eye. So it's very interesting. I kind of went into it feeling like it was probably going to be a 3-star. I've had it for so long, haven't read it yet until now. Then about halfway through, the pacing was just a little weird, and I was struggling to really see where it was going and what the end goal of this story was, and so it made it a little hard to read, so I thought it was going to be like a 2-star because I was really struggling with it. And then I finished it and I ended up giving it a 4-star, so definitely shot up in the second half. And honestly, the first half wasn't that bad. I think it was just a combination of my expectations, and I also just struggle when I first start a new book, especially if I haven't read it like as part of a series or anything. As far as things I enjoyed, I loved the world. I found it fascinating, this futuristic world that has regressed. It was very, very interesting. I didn't love the characters. Mostly I just felt like they were very generic, so it was like more I just didn't care a ton about them. I didn't mind the relationship. I did like the main character tends to be a little more willing to trust people than a lot of YA heroines are, but not to the point of being stupid about it. She recognizes she needs to be careful because, like, she's the Red Rook, like, she can't just trust anybody, but she is willing to trust people, and I feel like that doesn't happen a lot in YA with female heroines nowadays, and I find it actually kind of irritating when they're not willing to trust, like, anybody. And so I appreciated that about her. I did feel like the romance was a little fast, which was one downside to it, but I felt like they were good together. Like, I didn't mind their characters being together. I felt like they were a good fit, which often doesn't happen for me. So I really enjoyed that, and I felt like the story had some good plot twists that kept me interested, and I really enjoyed that as well. Next, I picked up Two Dark Reigns by Kendare Blake. This is the third book in the Three Dark Crowns series. The fourth one is about to come out in a few months, which I'm so excited for. Basically, this follows a world in which every generation there's a set of triplets born to the queen, and each one has a different power. There's like 5 different powers that they could have, and basically they are raised separately until they're about 16 years old, and then they kind of come together and they begin a year in which they are trying to kill each other, and whoever is left standing basically becomes the next queen. It's a very brutal type of thing, but it's also super interesting. Basically, we follow Arsinoe, Mirabella, and Catherine, who are the most recent of the queens, and it is really, really good. I love the world so much. The history of this world is so fascinating and plays such a huge role in the plot that I just absolutely love it. I honestly have taken a while to really care about the characters, and even still I don't really care, but I do enjoy them a little bit more than I used to, and I feel like I can separate them a little bit better. Within the first book and up until like halfway through the second book, it was really hard to tell them apart. It was almost like they were telling me about differences in their personalities, but I wasn't really seeing it. And so they felt very generic and very much the same. They still feel pretty generic, but I feel like I can separate them out a little bit more, and I have like the ones I prefer. The characters have kind of been a slow burn for me. Some of the romances, all of the romances in this book I really don't care about. I guess Arsinoe and Billy I enjoy, but really I just love the history. I love this world and discovering more about it, and I'm actually really sad that there's only one more book in this world, because I just feel like there's so much to this island that they live on that I could find out, and I don't get to because there's only one more book, so that was kind of sad. I also, in one of the novellas just before this book, it talks about the last Oracle Queen. Basically, since this last Oracle Queen, she did something very paranoid seeming that was really bad, and so in the past 800 years since her, all Oracle queens who are born are drowned at birth because people are so afraid that the same thing's gonna happen. So we find out a little bit more about what actually happened in that story, and I was really hoping that would come into play in this, but it didn't, which was really sad, but it's fine. It's very much a bingeable series. Again, I don't necessarily love the characters, but I love the world, and I find the plot really interesting because it's so connected to the history. Also, gave this 4 out of 5 stars, I believe, and it was for the challenge Potions, which is to read a sequel, so that's what this covered. Next, for Defense Against the Dark Arts, I was able to pick up a book that starts with the letter R for, I think it was Reducto. There's so many R spells, I was like, I don't know what spell this is going with. It could have been Rictusempra or Ridiculous or Reducto. It was Reducto. Anyway, but that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is a book written in the 30s, so it's a classic. and it is a psychological thriller following this unnamed main character who ends up marrying this man who about a year previous had lost his first wife, Rebecca, to a boating accident. They go off to live at his estate called Manderley, and when she gets there, she starts recognizing that just about everybody is kind of obsessed with Rebecca, and she herself becomes pretty obsessed with her as she's trying to figure out who she was and why everybody seems to love her so much, and kind of starts comparing herself to Rebecca in a lot of ways. That's all I'm gonna say because it's a thriller. I don't want to spoil anything because that would make it less fun to read. Anyway, but I really enjoyed this. I loved how insane everybody was. Everybody had something that was off about them. Especially Mrs. Danvers, I was very taken with just her psychological battle with Mrs. De Winter, the main character. That's the only name we get for her is Mrs. De Winter. Anyway, their psychological battle over Rebecca is so creepy and interesting, and it actually makes me cry at one point because it's almost heartbreaking how twisted and manipulative Mrs. Danvers ends up being. There was one plot twist that I felt like was like the most obvious choice for the plot twist, but there were several other plot twists that I did not see coming, and so I felt like it wasn't just like one big plot twist, which made it a lot more enjoyable. There were several plot twists along the way, and I really enjoyed this. I will say there was one character that was less messed up than everybody else. It was the land agent, I forgot his name. I just loved him. He was so sweet, and at one point I was like, man, the main character should have married him. He's so much better. Anyway, he has some messed up things to him as well. Not as much as everybody else, but still some. Anyway, absolutely loved it. I think I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, possibly 4 out of 5 stars. I can't remember, but I might just say 5 out of 5 stars because I really liked it. Next, I read A Secret History of Witches by Louisa Morgan. This was for the challenge of herbology to read a book with a plant on the cover. So there's my little plant right there. But this is a historical fiction following 5 generations of witches. We start in the early 1800s and go all the way through World War II. And it is such a beautiful story. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I loved its theme of mother-daughter relationships and how important they are. I also really liked the ancestry aspect, the family history aspect of, you watch each generation as like some traditions and knowledge is lost and then regained, and how the names of the early generations are lost. And by the end, the last generation doesn't even know the names of some of the first people we learn about, which is so sad to me. I loved how different each of the women are. I felt like it would have been easy to make them very much the same, but they all have similarities because they're still related, but like they also have a lot of differences, and you're able to separate them in your mind. I feel like the last 2 generations were pretty similar actually, but the rest of them were pretty different. The reason why it wasn't a 5 stars, it could have been a 5 stars, but there was a lot of demonizing of men in this story. There was a lot of saying like, because we have so much power, men just want to kill us. And it was just overgeneralized, and that's something I hate. That's where stereotypes and prejudice comes from, is when you overgeneralize things about a certain sex or a certain race or anything. And so like being like, every man just hates the idea of women having more power than them, so they will at least toss us away, if not kill us. I didn't like that, and I felt like it was a constant battle between both sexes for power, and I'm like, why can't you have different kinds of power but work together? And I feel like towards the end there were better guys involved, and I was grateful for that. There was also a lot of having children out of wedlock, which I felt like it wasn't acting like it was a bad thing. It was almost being like, oh, well, the men can do what they want. The women are like, oh, I'm just happy to have a baby. And I'm like, I like that you're making good of the situation, but I also feel like it's almost making it, the women are still like, oh, I still love him and it's okay. I'm sad that he did that to me, but it's fine. I don't like that message of that's okay. Almost every generation had something like that, and I thought that was kind of annoying. In fact, halfway through, the first few generations had a lot of the demonizing of men and the out of wedlock stuff, and so I honestly was going to give it a lot lower rating, but the second half did a lot better at not doing those things, so that was good. Anyway, this was really good. There were some things I didn't like, but that's okay. Next, I was able to pick up Sourdough by Robin Sloan. This is for Ageline? Yes, the Charms Challenge, which was Ageline, which was to read an adult work. This is an adult novel. It's a little strange to explain, but basically there's this woman named Lois who works for this robotic arm company working on computer codes and stuff, and she is really overworked, constantly working. She's very, very busy, doesn't have any life outside of work. But one day she comes home and finds this menu for a delivery service on her door. She ends up ordering from them and then starts ordering from them every day after that. But eventually these two brothers who run this little business run into visa problems, and so they are sent away. Before they leave her their sourdough starter, which, if you don't know, it's basically like the yeast, but it's like still alive. You have to feed it every day and stuff like that. But this sourdough starter is a little strange. I'm not gonna go into how it's strange because that would ruin it, but basically there's a little bit of a magical realism element to this story, and she starts making sourdough with it and becomes really, really good at it and really loves it. So she joins this underground market that kind of combines technology and food in a bunch of unique ways. The story continues to follow two mysteries, mostly what is with the sourdough starter, what is it, how do you take care of it, what's its purpose, kind of a thing. And then the second mystery is who is running this underground food market thing that she's become a part of, because nobody really knows. So it's so interesting. It's a combination of like science fiction and magical realism and contemporary all like mashed into one. It's so, so fun to read. I absolutely loved it. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, mostly because I felt like the plot was a little weak in some places, but it was still like engaging. It's hard to explain it, but there wasn't like a solid, this is the mystery and we gotta find out the mystery. It was more like she's just kind of going about her life and like dealing with this starter and then like learning new things about different things. Anyway, it was a little bit of a weak plot. This author also wrote Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, and I felt like that had a much more grounded plot than this one did. I did really, really love this. I found Lois to be very sweet. She was so nerdy, and a lot of the characters in this book and Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore are so nerdy, and I just love it. So highly recommend if you're looking for just a lighthearted, fun, interesting read, because this is definitely that. And the last thing I read this month was actually a short story, and that was The Transformation by Mary Shelley. I read this out of my Phantom of the Opera Gothic Tales book. But anyway, this was my first introduction into Mary Shelley, and I absolutely loved the story. Since it is a short story, I'm not going to go too much into the synopsis of it, but basically there's this man who's very wealthy, he's about to get married, and he ends up losing everything. If I remember correctly, I think he's on the verge of committing suicide because he just has nothing, he's lost everything, but he ends up meeting this dwarf who is kind of like seems to be a little bit satanic, and they kind of strike a deal in which the dwarf will help him get all his stuff back, but he has to be willing to trade bodies for 3 days. It was really good. I really enjoyed Mary Shelley's writing. Oh yeah, also this was for the challenge for Transfiguration, which was to read a book with either a red cover or sprayed edges, so my copy had sprayed gold edges. Anyway, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very strange, but still really fun, and I liked the message it contained, that it's like sometimes you don't really know what form your angel is going to come in. That's going to not fix everything for you, but help you learn what you need to learn. Highly recommend, especially if you haven't read any of Mary Shelley and you're curious to see more. I haven't read Frankenstein at all. I'm hoping to soon, but you may want to start with a short story by her, because at least this one I really liked. I haven't read her other ones, but I enjoyed it. It was fun. I don't remember exactly what star. I think I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Especially for a short story, like, I can't expect too much, but I really, really liked it. So that is it. This video already is super long, so I'm just going to cut it off and say I will see you guys next time. Bye!